Hi, and welcome to a new video of this MOOC. In this video, we are going to learn how the Angular data binding feature works. So, data binding is a mechanism to coordinate parts of the component logic with parts to the component template. Okay, and also is used to communicate and to interact between parent and child components. Okay, Angular supports 4 types of data binding: the interpolation, the property and the event binding, and the two-way binding. So let's see each of these types of data binding in detail. The first of these data binding mechanisms is the interpolation. That is a mechanism to show the value of a component property in the template. So Angular evaluates the expressions we introduce between these double brackets, as we can see here in the slides, converting the results to a string and rendering it in the template. So for instance, if we have in the component logic a property that it's my car, and this property has inside the string representing the model of the car, when we put here in the template my car model is, and passing this property between double brackets, Angular will render the value of evaluating, or the result of evaluating this expression. Okay, we can of course use interpolation also for assigning values to a property in a tag, or here, as you can see here, for evaluating several expressions. But please be careful, because not every expression is legal. Okay, as you can see here, we have a list of expressions of JavaScript expressions that are not legal for being evaluated inside an interpolation. Okay, not this kind of assignments, the new word of JavaScript, and other kind of expressions that are not legal. The second one the second type of property binding of data binding we have in Angular is the property binding, and it's used for setting properties of elements in a view. As you can see here, we can, for instance, assign the source property of an image tag to the value of a property we have defined in the component logic. Okay, the same for example to this property of the button, of this button tag, or for example for assigning classes to a specific element. When the property value is a string, this is totally equivalent to the interpolation we have saw before. So these two expressions are totally equivalent. Okay, we can use property binding or interpolation for assigning the value of this property to the source property of this image tag. The third type of data binding is the event binding, that is usually used for capturing events from the DOM. So for instance, we include here the click event of this button, and we assign it to the onSave method. When the user clicks in this button in the interface, Angular will call to the onSave method we have defined in the logic of this component. Okay, of course we can pass the payload of the event than Angular detects to the method we define in the component logic. So for instance, we are capturing a key app event in the web interface, we can pass to the onKey method the payload of the event. In this case, just for displaying the specific key the user has pressed in the keyboard. Okay, this is the way in which we can pass the event payload between the or from the template to the component logic. Then we have the two-way binding, that is just a mixing between the property and the event binding. So in this example, for instance, we can see how we can mix a property binding and an event binding with just a single expression here, using a combination of both formats. Okay, and this is called two-way binding in Angular. So here we are assigning the value of the property font size pixels to this size property in the element, in the application sizer component, and we are also capturing the events that comes from the child element to the parent. But in Angular, this is mainly used in forms, when we are developing a form, in order to bind what the user is typing in the form to a property that is defined in the component, and vice versa. So for instance, here we can see how we are displaying here the value of the username property that we have defined in the component logic, and we are also capturing the input that the user types in this input tag of the HTML of the component template, and assigning the result to the username property. We will see now an example in order to better understand this. But before the example, let's see just a detail, that is the fact that the ng model directive that we are using here for using the feature I've just explained is included in the forms module of Angular. So before using it, we have to import the forms module from the Angular Forms library and then include it. And this is, of course, done in the application module, in the root module of our application. But let's see an example of how this two-way binding works in an Angular application. Okay, so I have here a Hello World application up and running, the sample application that Angular deploys for us, and I have included here in the application module, as you can see, the forms module in order to be able to include this two-way binding. So I have imported the forms module, and I have included in the imports list of the root of the application module. So now I'm going to the application logic, and I'm going to include here a new property that is called username. Okay, this of just an string. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is to include in the HTML two new tags. On the one hand, an input tag that I'm going to bind using the ng model directive we have just seen to the username property of my component. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is to include here a paragraph component that just will display the value of this property. Okay, so as you can see here, what I'm doing is to bind the value the user includes or the user writes in this input to the username property that I have defined here in my application, in my component logic, and then I print the value of this property, of username property, in this tag. Okay, so you can see now how Angular has rebuilt the result of these changes, and when I type here the an string in the input, it is directly displayed in this value. So I have included here this Angular feature that gets the value of this input property, sets this value in the username property of my component, and as I have used the two-way binding directly, this value is directly printed here in this tag. Okay, so that's all for this video. We are now able to bind parts of our template, our component template, to parts of the logic, and see you in the next video. Bye.